Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Billings. I'm an editor at Scientific American. And in keeping with knowing that we can't travel through time, we are going to talk now to three esteemed panelists about the limits, other limits in science. Let me go ahead and just introduce all of them. Starting over here, we have Andre Linde. He is a professor of physics at Stanford University and one of the originators of the theories of cosmological phase transitions, new inflation, chaotic inflation, eternal inflation, and the multiverse. Here in the middle, we have Xiaowei Zhuang, and she is a biophysicist at Harvard University. She's developed new imaging methods for studying biological systems at the nanoscale, including STORM, which we heard about earlier today, a super resolution imaging method which has revealed previously unknown cellular structures. And we have Gary Ruvkin, a molecular biologist at Massachusetts General Hospital and a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. Gary is one of the discoverers of gene regulation by microRNAs, which we'll hear more about. And he also is involved in the design of an automated genome sequencer to be used on Mars, apparently. Maybe we'll talk about that some too. So in keeping with the theme of this, dealing with great questions from Stephen Hawking's last book, I'm going to read a little passage, and then we're going to riff on that a little bit. Here it is. I don't believe in boundaries, either for what we can do in our personal lives or for what life and intelligence can accomplish in the universe. We stand at a threshold of important discoveries in all areas of science. We will find out what happened at the Big Bang. We will come to understand how life began on Earth. We may even discover whether life exists elsewhere in the universe. That last question, that's for the next panel, so we're not going to cover that. So that kind of brings me really to the question, the opening question here, which is, do you agree with that? Do you agree with Hawking's optimism that we're going to figure out what exactly happened at the Big Bang, or that we're going to figure out exactly how life started on Earth? Andre, maybe we could go to you first for the cosmological big picture. Do you think that that's feasible? And if not, why not? What are the obstacles, the limits?
How exactly we probably will not know, and that is one of the reasons is exactly what Hawking did. He said, for example, that if you have a black hole, you will never see what happens inside. And if you jump to the black hole, then you will never say others what happens there. So one part of modern picture of cosmology is inflationary theory, tells you that the universe originally experienced the stage of accelerated expansion. And this expansion formally have been described by something like you are living surrounded by black hole. Okay, it's a bit strange to imagine, but the thing is that you see only some part of the universe and you do not see anything outside of this part. So you will never have access to what happens sufficiently far away. And the same thing prevents you from knowing exactly what happened at the Big Bang. You see only something which happened long after the Big Bang, and you have no access to what happens at the Big Bang. Or at least this is to the level of our present understanding, and our present understanding changes.
So how far back can we look? How far into the universe's history can we see?
10 to the minus 35 seconds after the, we cannot see closer to 0 than this 10 to the minus 35 seconds. Up to 10 to the 35 cannot. After 10 to the 35, everything is simple. Okay.
To a biologist, that's everything.
Yeah. and 10 to the minus 35, what is that? Is that like a trillionth of a trillionth of a?
It's a billions of a billions of a billions of a millions of a second.
Okay.
And that's approximately.
All right. Approximately. And have we actually reached that limit yet? How close are we to getting there?
We actually see right now on the sky using this cosmic microwave background radiation experiments, Planck satellite, WMAP satellite, we see the processes which happen there. We see some spots on the sky which have been produced from quantum fluctuations which were created at that time. And then these quantum fluctuations were stretched all over the visible part of the universe, and you can explore them, you can study them, you can check, and use them to, well, to verify or disprove different models of inflationary theory. So you can study it really. And you can even put it, the picture in physical review letters, etc., show it to them. And then people from Planck go in giving talks showing this picture, and they're surprised that nobody is excited because the picture looks like you put some paper, some spray, like you can buy them in Home Depot, and you have some chaotic distribution of dots, red, blue, whatever. But what is important that by looking at these spots, they see the quantum fluctuations, which have been produced at this 10 to the minus 35 or so seconds after the beginning of everything, if the beginning exists. There are some small questions, but
small minor questions. And as for inflation, I mean, how far do you think we're towards really proving that as a...
What?
Well, confirming that inflation actually happened versus just having it be a...
Okay, the first thing that proves that inflation happens is that we are around. Because if not, we would not have enough space. Okay, our space is practically flat. What I mean that the curvature of the universe, it is still there, but three-dimensional part is practically flat, like parallel lines do not intersect. If you start with any genetic model of the universe, it will become very, very clumpy and curved, and parallel lines will intersect or diverge, and we would see it. They don't. And then these small, tiny spots on the sky, which is you can produce using Home Depot spray, they will never mimic exactly what happens on the real sky because they have some specific spectrum of fluctuations, which are drawn like a curve like that, okay? And this curve, people from Planck, they put a spot here and spot here and spot here, and each of the spot is experimental data. And the curve is something which inflation predicts. So you have many, many spots through which this curve goes. So it's like you have many experiments effectively showing that there's something magical about the theory which probably predict all of these places which you go through. So
I see. And so you're actually kind of a pessimist then about fulfilling Hawking's dream of really knowing exactly what happened at the Big Bang. We're not going to get all the way there. We're going to get up to the 10 to the negative 35th.
You know what Einstein said once? I better be optimist but wrong rather than pessimist but right. So we just hold to our opinions and then change them on the way.
Perfect. And Xiaowei, moving on to, I guess, the question of origins of life. And I think this is a relevant transition here because you naturally got your start in physics, actually, and then you transferred to biology. We could talk a little more of that. But what do you think the prospects are for understanding the origins of life, really tracing it all the way back?
Right. I think in terms of the origin of life, you could actually look at it in two different ways. One is, at the very, very early time, how do these molecules that are relatively special for living systems, how did they came out, right? That's one thing, one sort of a branch of the origin of life. The other is you look at our current time, then we have all these molecules in our body, and life is nonetheless an emergent property. It is a property that when all these molecules are interact together mysteriously, that give us life. And how does that happen? So I look at these two things as two different kinds of origins of life question. The second one, as life scientists like Gary and I, we work so much on, and I'm an optimistic, I think eventually we can solve this problem. The first kind, there are a lot of people working on, and then they're trying to do experiment to mimic, to see how do we create those kind of molecules that are special for life.
Right.
And there are tremendous success already. But how do you prove that what you generated in the laboratory is actually what happened early on? That is an interesting question I don't know an answer about.
Right. Are there certain ways that maybe some of your imaging techniques that are overcoming the diffraction limit might be used to kind of study that second question, the way that life organizes itself and manifests, and maybe that could give us some hints and clues?
Yeah, you just described my goal of research. So, we really, would love to use, well, I would say that I myself, we like to develop new imaging approaches and so on. But to answer this question of how all these molecules interact together, collectively give rise to life, it really requires all kinds of different approaches, not just imaging approaches. But from the imaging approaches, I would love to be able to really someday reach a point where we can visualize these molecules at very fine details, as if we shrunk ourselves to the size even smaller than molecules, to look at the interactions at the molecular, submolecular level, but not so small so that, it almost sounds like a dilemma, because I also want to see all of these molecules together, and so that we can see how this collective emergent property arrive, because it comes from not just two molecules interact, but I don't know, how do we describe 10 to the, we probably don't have 10 to the 35, molecules, but it is a pretty astronomical number in our body, how many molecules do we have, and how do they all collectively interact. This is the kind of thing that in the imaging world, we are both, not just we means big we, not just my lab, many labs are both trying to see something extremely small, but see something as a holistic way of, now hopefully by that, if we could just directly watch these movies, maybe we get a hint of how life came about.
Yeah, I was going to ask about some of the fundamental limitations to some of your super resolution imaging techniques and how far down you can go, what you can see, but I'm almost wondering if it's more relevant to talk about the idea of looking at something holistically, like you're saying, trying to see the entire assemblage of molecules all at once, and whether or not that's a limit in and of itself, and that we might just be generating too much or dealing with too much data to really cohesively put together into one thing we can grasp and see very easily.
That's a very good question. So we live in the era we call big data, and indeed, some of the data that we're generating, in terms of some of our new imaging approaches and trying to identify all the different types of cells, what are the different types of cells exist in our body, their location, to get a whole human cell atlas and so on. We're talking about many petabytes of, no, it's exabytes of data, right? So with that, you're saying that, are we overwhelmed with the information that are fed to us, or whether we can actually be intelligent enough with the help of computers, machine learning and so on, to actually extract information? I firmly believe the latter.
Nice, nice. And now Gary, you're kind of more involved, I think, with that first side of things, where you're looking at how RNAs, for instance, well, not entirely how RNAs came about, but I mean, some of your work is getting into that, because you're looking at how microRNAs regulate gene expression, how they must have kind of come about to some degree. And so is that, that's relatively accurate, right?
Well, modern genomics is a historical enterprise in the sense that by reading genomes, you're reading history. It's a form of archaeology, really. And it didn't have to be, but living in our genomes are remnants of a past world, the RNA world, that is clearly the precursor to the current DNA world. And it's still alive. Even though DNA displaced it in many, many, many ways, you could see the evidence of the past world in the script of our genomes. And this is the wonderfulness of modern genomics, is it's accurate to 1 part in a billion, and it's reading all these scripts, all these Rosetta Stones, and revealing our past in amazing ways. And the funny thing about scientific discovery that I think the public never really gets is usually when something is true, it's true in 100 different ways. It resonates with a bunch of different things. And so when these RNA enzymes were found, it was like, oh, this would explain, the origin of life. This would explain the first replicase. This would explain so much, and so it was almost obviously true, and almost not. There was not as much doubt, because it's not like some weird fact. And in one sense, genomics, in my mind, has a lot of similarities to astrophysics, where there's surprises that come up that you didn't expect, and they're wonderful, and you need to explain them. But often the explanation is right there. It's just obvious.
Speaking of surprises, and kind of going back to you, Andre, one of the consequences of inflation seems to be this idea of the multiverse. Now, is that fair to say that's a surprise that came out of inflation?
Well, it was a shock to me, really one of the strongest emotional feeling in my life when this realization came. But people were preparing for that. There were several different people are trying to do this. They wanted to understand whether the universe can exist only in one copy, etc. And the prevailing point of view was that, yes, of course. In fact, Einstein in '49, he had written in his biographical notes that he would like to prove a theorem which, and that is just amazing, how the person, his own intellectual honesty doesn't allow him to say more than he can. He said, to prove a theorem which is not based on anything but faith, on intellectual, on, comprehensibility of our universe, so that there is only one system of laws which is logically consistent, and every other theory just impossible, etc. So he was trying to prove that. And he also invented something which is called cosmological principle, which explains why the universe must be everywhere the same. And I used to make a joke that some people who do not have good ideas, they have principles. And then I learned that it was suggested by Albert Einstein, so I stopped. But it is just, you see everywhere the same. You see the electron mass to the right and to the left of you is the same. Electron charge is the same. So it is like a constant. You know that the electromagnetic constant practically does not change with enormous accuracy, like 10 to the 15, whatever. Anyway, this is a constant. So what we are learning that some of these constants, they depend on other things. They may have environmental origin. So there may be parts of the universe where electron mass is different, and in fact, there is no electron there. And mass of the proton and neutron are also different from what we see right now. And in fact, only if we assume this, we will be able to understand many coincidences which otherwise have no real physical explanation. But this looks like a pipe dream. Okay, give me many universes. One is not enough for you, okay, can you go to a shop and buy another one? No, the assumption was that this is how it is. But what we learned is that to create the universe in the theory that we are developing, inflationary cosmology, to create the universe, you do not need much. You can have less than 1 milligram of matter, and then suddenly create all the world with apparent contradiction to the energy conservation, which is not contradicted here, but it's complicated. Anyway, so the point is that if we can create one universe, then why not two? And then quantum fluctuations can do it for you. So you have a pink universe, and then suddenly some part of it becomes green, and some part expands exponentially, and inside a blue area, and by pink, blue, and green, I mean different realizations of laws of physics. Like you have water, and water is H2O, liquid water, but also solid water. And just imagine that the captain of the ship believes that water can be only liquid. And then, well, sometimes at night he crashed into iceberg. So one should be prepared for different options. And once you start being prepared and see that these options really exist in the theory, then suddenly you say, oh my God, Now I understand why vacuum energy is so small, tiny. This was discovered, well, by some people who work here and in present Perlmutter, others. So it was sensational discovery of 98 that we have tiny energy of vacuum which has no explanation. People were trying to find explanation for why energy of vacuum is equal to 0, maybe some symmetry, whatever. For decades we're trying to do, we failed. Now we found that we must explain why it is almost exactly 0, but just a little bit non-zero. And the only explanation for that, if it were too large, then we would be dead because the universe is expanding too fast. If it were negative, we would be dead because the universe collapses. So it's just right. But for that, you would need to have a pink universe which will die because cosmological constant vacuum energy is too large, and another universe which would die because whatever. So if you have a choice, you have a possibility to choose just right universe. And it solves many problems which otherwise would remain unsolvable.
What you were saying about how constants kind of are maybe a product of the universe they occur in, kind of makes me think a little bit back to life, about how maybe the way that life originates has a lot to do with really what kind of planet and environment it finds itself on. Do you find that idea appealing? Do you think that if we look out elsewhere in the universe to find life, that we're going to be seeing things that are built of RNA or DNA or?
Yeah, I'm a very strong believer in that. One of the things we know is that life is a planetary transforming force, right? The atmosphere of Earth is completely transformed by the invention of photosynthesis. It completely changes the planet. You know, maybe that's not the same as a black hole, but it's pretty big to a biologist. So, you know, life can cultivate planetary systems, a very natural part of it. And so the idea of it spreading across a galaxy I find very, very attractive. And one of the reasons, some people don't like that idea because they say, well, you're just putting off where did it all start to somewhere else. Right. But at least you want to know the truth. You know, did it start here or did it not start here? And I think the evidence that it didn't start here is just how quickly you get to very complicated life with, you know, like the ribosome, the thing that translates mRNA into proteins. This is a very highly evolved system. And it looks like 3.5 billion years ago it existed. There were full-on bacteria that were like modern at that point. So you got all the way to that point fast. And so you either have to say, geez, it's dead easy to evolve life, and you know, anybody can do it anywhere, or it just rained down and it's just a contaminant. It came from somewhere else. Huh. The problem with that idea is you know, it only buys you another 10 billion years, right?
Just another 10 billion.
But, well, because the Earth is 4 billion years, 4.5, and so getting an extra 10, I'd like to get an infinite amount of time.
Chua, you were about to say something.
I think it also depends on how you define life, right? So, you know, I also think that, I thought that's the third panel's question.
I veered into it a little bit.
They can do number theory.
Okay. Well, we actually are wrapping up on time.
But you know, the thing is, you know, if you define life in a way, it is a living thing that could self-replicate and evolve and so on. It might not be the kind of life that we know that are based on RNA, DNA, and proteins. In that sense, I think it might be more likely. Well, you know, I don't know where I have the basis for that. Let me just call it a hunch. It might be more likely to find a life of that kind of a form that's different from the form of life that we have on Earth elsewhere, but can have the ability to get to a point of, as I said, reproducing, evolving, thinking, behaving, and so on, just based on entire different set kind of molecules. You know, it's hard to see those in the scientific fiction movies because they usually give them this macroscopically different look because, see, you never see these scientific fiction movies of, ETs that have different kinds of molecules in them.
Right, right.
So maybe we need high-resolution movies so that
there we go. There's the
so
connection.
when you're seeing the different
There you
AT
go.
life, their molecules also look different.
So just to wrap up, it sounds like Andre is very skeptical we're ever going to see the exact origin of Big Bang, or maybe we'll see it in a multiverse someplace. You're very optimistic about seeing the origins of life, and you think you've already figured it out, Gary, that it came from space.
But I can prove a theorem that without life, the universe cannot exist. So the inevitable connection have connection to each other. And that was actually proven in '67, though the person who was proving it, he probably would not do it. It's Bryce DeWitt, who was author of quantum cosmology. He have written equation for the wave function describing everything, equation for the wave function of the universe. And surprisingly, this equation looked like that. The speed with which this wave function is changing is equal to the total energy of the universe multiplied by the wave function. And he has also proven a theorem that the total energy of all universe is exactly zero, identical, okay? So then this equation means that the speed of change of the wave function is equal to zero. And he looked at that, checked the theorem, energy of matter plus energy of gravity plus energy of everything just sums up to zero. The energy of gravity is negative. So what do? This equation tells you that we are now having a discussion or whatever. Wave function of the universe doesn't depend on that. No memory, no anything, okay? And he said, no. We are never asking questions why wave function of the universe changes in time. We're asking a question, why do we see the universe evolving in time? And for that, we divide the universe into observers and the rest of the universe. The rest of the universe plus observers have total energy zero. But if I have, well, go to detail, 80 kilos, then the universe has energy equal to my 80 kilos with a sign minus. The universe, rest of the universe, has energy equal to my mass with a negative sign. So the wave function of the rest of the universe can rotate because it is a reflection of those who observes it. Without observers, the universe, wave function of the universe without observers doesn't exist. Exists, but it is dead. It has no evolution. So evolution appears only together with observers.
Wow. Is your mind blown? My mind's pretty blown right now. We're out of time. Thank you so much.